Let's turn in our Bibles this morning to Exodus chapter 13. Exodus 13 and verse number 17, and we're going to read on down into chapter number 14. Exodus 13, verse number 17. And it came to pass, when Pharaoh had let the people go, that God led them not through the way of the land of the Philistines, although that was near. For God said, lest peradventure the people repent when they see war, and they return to Egypt. But God led the people about through the way of the wilderness of the Red Sea. And the children of Israel went up harnessed out of the land of Egypt. And Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for he had straitly sworn the children of Israel, saying, God will surely visit you, and ye shall carry up my bones away hence with you. And they took their journey from Succoth, and encamped in Etham in the edge of the wilderness. And the Lord went before them by day in a pillar of a cloud to lead them the way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light to go by day and night. He took not away the pillar of the cloud by day, nor the pillar of fire by night from before the people. And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, Speak unto the children of Israel, that they turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-zephon. Before it shall ye encamp by the sea. For Pharaoh will say of the children of Israel, they are entangled in the land. The wilderness has shut them in, and I will harden Pharaoh's heart, that he shall follow after them, and I will be honored upon Pharaoh, and upon all his host, that the Egyptians may know that I am the Lord. And they did so. And it was told the king of Egypt that the people fled, and the heart of Pharaoh and of his servants was turned against the people, and they said, Why have we done this, that we have let Israel go from serving us? And he made ready his chariot, and took his people with him, and he took 600 chosen chariots, all the chariots of Egypt, and captains over every one of them. And the Lord hardened the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, and he pursued after the children of Israel. And the children of Israel went out with an high hand. But the Egyptians pursued after them, all the horses and chariots of Pharaoh, and his horsemen and his army, and overtook them, encamping by the sea beside Pi-hahiroth, before Baal-zephon. And when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were sore afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. And they said unto Moses, Because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, Let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. Now, we're not going to get to the end of that story just at the moment, but I want us to think about this and what is happening in this whole scenario. Now they're panicked, and they're speaking rashly, to Moses. We would have been better just to die in Egypt. But I want us to think about what God was doing for them. And sometimes it's almost, it's easy maybe for us to miss what God is really doing, and we feel in bondage even to our circumstances. And of course, this weekend, especially up into this next week, will be focused on freedom, and that message as a nation anyway, the July 4th celebration and all. But I want us to be able to think a little bit deeper than just even our nation, although we're looking at a nation right here that was dealing with some real challenges, and it seemed as though God must be far away because of what he was doing in their lives and the way he was leading them. But I want to notice with you this morning, freedom in the unexpected. Freedom in the unexpected. James Brown in Discoveries told of learning to fly an airplane. And as he had to go up with an instructor and all, and his instructor told him to put the plane into a deep and extended dive. And after a brief time, the engine stalled. And then the plane began to plunge out of control. I think it seemed like I had read it was a dive. It may have been a climb. But at any rate, the engine stalled. And it looked like the instructor is surely going to have to take over here. James Brown was getting panicked, and so he's expecting the instructor to help out, but before too long it became clear, well, it doesn't look like he's doing anything, and so his mind is panicked, and yet after a little bit it began to kind of function again. He's trying to think through, now what can I do? And as he thought through it properly, then he was able to take control of the situation and get it out of that stall that it had gotten into. And when it was all under control again, then Mr. Brown turned to his instructor and began to vent his frustrations. Why didn't you help me? Why do you just sit there? It was too close a call, in Mr. Brown's mind. But the reply was calm, and it came back to him. And this is what he said. The instructor said, "There is no position you can get this airplane into that I cannot get you out of. If you want to learn to fly, go up there and do it again." I like that little phrase there. There is no situation or no position you can get this airplane into that I cannot get you out of. And that really speaks a lot about life whenever it comes to our relationship with God. There is no position we can get into, nothing He asks of us that He can't get us out of, that He can't bring us through to freedom and victory and blessing. I know freedom seems to come in a variety of different shapes and sizes, doesn't it? And some may see freedom in one sense, and others would say, oh my, that's not freedom at all. And many times that may be the case even spiritually, where we think that God has been good to us and it's a good life, a freedom in Christ, and yet others may look on and they think, you call that freedom? It sounds like it's a bunch of rules to me maybe, or it sounds like bondage. I wouldn't want to live that way or whatever. And of course others may, in other cases, they may think of freedom as good times or lack of governmental interference maybe, or in some cases, maybe even they'd go so far as to say a lack of moral restraint. Just free. But sometimes freedom can be found in the tough times, the difficult places of life. And we may not often think of it that way, but those are some of the best times to know that we're free. The children of Israel right here are getting into, well, of course they've been for a number of years, 430 years or so, they'd been in a tough time. And for many, that's all they had ever known. In fact, as any of those that were alive then, that's all they would have ever known. And so now they're being let out. Now, but of course, it didn't even look like it's happening at first. Remember how Moses went back, and now they begin thinking, well, why did you even come back if this is all you had to offer? Because Pharaoh began to put even greater burdens on them. But God knew what was going on. He understood they need to be kind of pushed a little bit. They need to get out of their comfort zone so they'll be ready to leave. They were at their wits' end, and it was getting worse. But finally they were free. Probably seemed too good to be true to many or all of them. And they may have even been wondering, is this really going to come together here? Maybe it won't work out in the end after all. You know how that may sometimes feel. Almost like it's a dream that I'll wake up and it won't be really true. And yet when they began to make their way along, they realized the slime pits are behind them, a new day is ahead of them, the promised land is not too far away, they may have begun to feel like, wow, this is really real. I mean, it's not just for a day or so, but the days are beginning to pile up. And it does seem like we are really free. After all, I didn't have to go to make brick this morning. I didn't have to go collect straw. But I want to notice what God said in chapter 14, verse number 2. Speak unto the children of Israel that they turn and encamp before Pi-hahiroth, between Migdol and the sea, over against Baal-zephon. Before it shall ye encamp by the sea. Wait a minute. That doesn't seem to be the right way. Can we take a vote on this? Lord, that's not the direction we want to head. You see, they would have rather gone the closest, the easiest, the quickest way. Of course, maybe those are two different things, actually. Because God told them in verse 17, I don't want them to go through the land of the Philistines. It may have been the closest, but it wasn't the easiest. I guess that's where we would be going. It wasn't going to be easy because they very possibly would be attacked by the Philistines, and then they'd become discouraged. And so God was leading the way just as He saw they needed to go. We may not know exactly the path that Israel took, but there seems to be some evidence anyway that this course that He was giving them here was going to take them through a gap kind of between mountains towering on either side. So in a sense, you might say they were going into the tunnel. They can't go to the right. They can't go to the left. And when they get through there, they can't go straight ahead because there's the sea. Not totally sure, perhaps. There's a lot of debate on it. Some have indicated, you probably have seen some of the pictures, that supposedly show chariots down under the sea there. And there does seem to be some circumstantial evidence, at least, where it's not a steep drop into the sea there, but more of a shoal that they can go out across. Not truly a shoal. I mean, they still need the water parted, but it's more of a gradual slope there than some other places. So perhaps this is where it was. And if that's the case, it seems as though they would have come out from between those two mountains. Now Pharaoh's behind them, the sea's ahead of them, and there's mountains on either side. It didn't seem like the right thing for sure. And yet God knew what He was doing. There may be some times where God brings us to an unexpected point of trial or hardship. Maybe an impossibility that we didn't see coming. We thought it was going to, we're free, everything's going to go great. And yet God brings us through a pathway that we don't like for our good. If we have to solve a problem, it may seem bleak. But actually, that can be the point of freedom if we choose to trust God. You see, there is a special freedom that is found in simply turning everything over to God. And that's kind of what I want to focus on for a little bit here this morning. Freedom in the unexpected. When it would look like, well, this is worse than before, it may be the point where we can just take our hands off and say, all right, Lord, I'm leaving it up to You. And so let's look at several thoughts along that line here quickly this morning. First of all, freedom in letting God choose the path. Now, of course, there may have been all sorts of thoughts on a better course to take out of Egypt. We've already talked about that a little bit. And, of course, I think you're familiar with the story. There was a main highway that would have gone right up through into the Promised Land. And it would seem like, oh, that's the way to go. That's what we should do. The Philistine way was closer. Even perhaps the initial course may have seemed less restrictive. Even if we have to kind of cut out across here, it's still, it's not terrible. I mean, we'd rather not go through the wilderness at all here. It'd be easier to just go straight through, but even this would be better. But if you look at the way that God sent them, maybe you take a look at a Bible map and you look at how they were headed kind of, I guess you'd say northeast, and then they got turned way down around here, where maybe that's not exactly, now of course later on they went even further. I guess I jumped ahead a little bit. Yeah, they went way out around by going down into the southern part of that tip there toward Mount Sinai. But even before that, they had to turn and go this other way to cross the Red Sea there. And so there was certainly a strange path that was charted for them. It may not have looked reasonable, but it was the right way. There were all sorts of other possibilities. Now, remember, Pharaoh and his army were coming after them. It wouldn't have mattered if they were going up the Philistine way or whether they cut kind of out across here and avoided the Red Sea or gone the way they went. The result was the same. Pharaoh was after them. And God was taking them in a course that would allow Him to destroy the enemy. Now, I'm sure God could have done it any way He wanted to. But what the people couldn't see and what they thought was disaster, God was working it all out. He knew the next step. And there is a freedom in letting God choose our path. Now, of course, in this case, the people could grumble and complain about the path. They could be frustrated about it, or they could just simply learn to trust God. No, He knew the course they needed to take, and remember that He's going with them. Remember, we just read here about the pillar of a cloud and the pillar of fire. He was going with them. He knew what was best. Sometimes you and I can get the idea that, well, we know the best way to take. We know the course we should go. And sometimes we might even choose that for ourselves. Oh, Lord, I think I've got this right now. But any time that we take a path different than God has charted for us, we're in trouble. And so this morning I want us to remember that following God's path is best by far. There's freedom in letting God choose the path. There's also freedom in letting God choose the timing. Having taken God's pathway, the people must have wondered how God can come through. I mean, look, there's a mountain over here, and there's a mountain over here, and there's a sea out ahead of us, and the Egyptians are behind us, and they must have wondered about it. If God had only kept the Egyptians at bay a little longer, well, maybe we could have actually found a way of escape. Maybe we could have hidden somewhere, maybe, or somehow gotten to safety a little different way, or I don't know what they were thinking. If they could have built boats or something, I don't know what they had in mind. The most natural deliverance would have seemed to have been to just avoid the showdown altogether, right? I mean, that's what we would usually think of it. That's what we would want for ourselves. Oh, it's far better, Lord, for you not to have to even get me to the difficult spot. It'd be far better for you to help me avoid that spot. And that's what we would often think. But God had the timing all worked out here too. The very point that they felt most hopeless, you notice what happened? The pillar of the fire, of cloud and fire moved and interfered. It came between them and the Egyptians. It caused a hindrance to the oncoming army. And then that very night, not just did the pillar move, but then the wind began to blow. And as the wind blew, the water opened up before them, created a path for them. And without a hitch, the victory came. Now, I don't know what that must have been like. You could speculate, I suppose, all you want to, and that's fine. But can you imagine walking across? We're not talking about, going across Penns Creek. This is a large body of water. And so it's going to take them quite some time for even the very first person now to reach the other side. Regardless of where the last person is, even the first person is going to have a long time to get there. And then you have this whole host of people to get across. And from the first person that started to the last person to get across the other side, it was probably quite some hours, I would say. We don't know for sure. Of course, nobody was there that's alive now, and we're not told in the Scripture just how many hours that would have taken. Surely it was a wide path, and so there were probably many across, and just flocking across, maybe it wasn't too terribly bad. Of course, it was throughout the night, apparently. But God knew all that was happening. And just on time, He opened the path for them and led them away. And then, just on time, He allowed the pillar to sort of move a little bit or whatever to where the Egyptians could see, oh, we need to go after them. So they came after just on time, could we say, so that they were destroyed in the water as it came back over them. God's timing was perfect. But sometimes we get the idea that somehow the timing just isn't right. God doesn't understand. He doesn't know when to come through. He doesn't know what would be best for me. And yet, really, the greatest freedom is knowing I don't have to figure this all out. God knows what's best in the timing for me. God knows when to bring me into this particular position. He knows how to help me when I get there as well. I know we complain if it doesn't work our way. Well, that's not what I had figured, and now I don't know what to do, and we can kind of sort of wring our hands, God may seem late to you, but there again, freedom comes when we let God figure out the timing. He knows what's best, and we don't. And so there's freedom in letting God choose the timing. The last one that I want to share with you today is freedom in letting God choose the reason. Freedom in letting God choose the reason. Now, here can be the hard part to this freedom aspect. I suppose probably all of us have asked why at some point or another, haven't we? It's easy for us to sort of think, well, Lord, why would you have done this? Why would you not come through whenever I thought you should or as I thought you should? In this case, we might have the children of Israel. We've already read it to you here, but they're asking why. What's going on? They said unto Moses, verse 11, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt thus with us, to carry us forth out of Egypt? Is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians? It's their why. And we may sort of criticize them almost because of this, and yet in reality, isn't that a little bit the way we are? Don't we sometimes ask, why? Why didn't you do this the way I thought you should? But again, it was God's purpose. God was bringing about His purpose. He had a reason for what He was doing in their lives. He was in the process of doing something so great, we're still talking about it this morning. For many, many years, the children of Israel, even throughout the generations, they would point back to the day that they came out of Egypt and crossed the Red Sea. God was permanently removing their problem, even though they thought it was the worst of problems in the process. And so for you and me, we have to look at our own points of question. You know, we kind of bind ourselves with the chains of reasoning. We want to know all the reasons why. We want to know the answers. We feel the need to find out that answer to the why question. Lord, why would you have done this? But there's freedom in just letting Him take care of the reason. He knows what He's doing. He knows how to touch us. And yet we ask questions like, why did I have to get sick? Good question. Why did I have to lose my job? Again, we don't understand. Why did my friend have to move away? Why didn't my romantic interest or relationship work the way I had hoped it would? Why? But you know, freedom comes when we decide to trust God with the reasons. When we just leave it in His hands. He knows what's best, and we can always trust Him. So this morning, I know it's great to enjoy our country's freedom, even if things are not ideal sometimes. It's great to think back. You know, we weren't, of course, in those days, but we've read about it. We know about it from history. We think back, and there's some great sentimental thoughts, I guess we'd say, about our country and those who sacrificed for us. But far better than just the freedom of a country and the good thoughts along that line it's the freedom that comes to the child of God that just simply gives everything to God and allows Him to work out every detail. We can enjoy the freedom in the unexpected things. We choose to remember that God knows the best path. He knows all about the timing. He knows the best reason. And He's working everything out for His glory. And ultimately, really, for our good as well. God knows how to give us freedom in the unexpected. So this morning, are you willing to trust Him? Are you willing to just put it into His hands and allow Him to give you freedom in your own soul, your own mind, even today? I know we may sometimes still have whys. We may still have questions. But I'm glad to tell you this morning, there is freedom. There is peace when we put it in His hands. Praise His name.